It is probably the biggest question that any believer in God has to ask. How could a good God allow evil? Let's consider. Hello, philosophers. I'm Chico. Welcome to the Philosopher Show, where we consider the greatest questions of human history. If God exists, we would want to know that. If he does exist, he may have some plans that have serious repercussions for us. Do good, go to heaven. Achieve some mystic union with God and you're relieved of your earthly pains. Do evil and go to hell forever. Whatever the repercussions are, they have the potential to be infinitely more extreme than anything on earth. I mean, imagine you being rich for 80 straight years, your entire life, right? Or 120. I don't know. Maybe you want to live that long. I don't know that I want to, but imagine 120 years on this earth being filthy rich, getting everything you want, versus an eternity in heaven. Just one reward in heaven, since it's gone for an eternity, would be an infinite reward, right? So if God exists, any reward that he has would be totally worth giving up your entire life for. The question is, does God exist? Now, there are a number of arguments for the existence of God, but I would say that this is the only serious argument against the existence of God. Some people will claim that, that science makes it so that we don't have to believe in God, and that is an argument that you shouldn't believe in God, but not an argument against the existence of God, just that you shouldn't believe in him. So still a powerful argument, but not an argument showing that God does not exist. Now, this is the beginning of our series talking about the different possibilities of why evil exists or what evil is. And we said that possibility one, this one that we're talking about, is that there's some purpose for evil. Possibility two, that evil falls from some kind of natural law-like result. Possibility three is that it exists, but it's absurd. And possibility four is that it doesn't exist. And for this possibility, we have this big thing that we have to worry about. How do we reconcile the existence of God with the existence of evil? And that is what's classically known as the problem of evil. Problem is, it seems like there's more than one problem of evil. What we'll talk about today is called the logical problem of evil. And this is sort of like we're sitting around in a classroom considering all the ills of the world and saying, how could God allow that? The second problem, which we could call the evidential problem of evil, is really taking the kinds of answers that we'll talk about in the coming weeks to this logical problem of evil and saying like, I don't buy that, like what about all this other stuff? And then the third one I'm going to call the existential problem of evil. And this is more like you are actually suffering yourself. You're not considering what about starving people somewhere else. You're saying this really awful thing is happening. Why would God allow this to happen to me? And I want to caution you before I get started here that taking anything that we say in response to the first two problems is going to seem just cavalier and cold in response to the third problem. I've suffered a lot myself, and I've seen some great suffering. I had a good friend whose wife died of breast cancer, and I would hate to say like, oh, here's some good reasons for why your wife. No, that's not what I'm going to do here, right? This is, again, more of us thinking about it theoretically speaking, right? So the existential problem of evil would be more like you're going through suffering yourself. And if that's your question, I'll also have some videos on those, but they won't be like these kinds of videos, right? They're not going to be like, oh, here's why you shouldn't be suffering, or here's why you shouldn't feel so bad about it. No, not at all. Okay, so let's talk about the logical problem of evil. This has actually been put a number of different ways. I don't know that I got this from any particular place, but I'm going to put it to you the best, the cleanest way that I've seen or that I've thought of. Number one, if God exists, then he could prevent evil. What do I mean by that? Well, like I said before, I had a friend that his wife died of breast cancer. Well, she was a friend of mine too. That sounds weird to say. But she died of breast cancer. And, I'm sure there is some cure for cancer. I hope there is some cure for cancer, but we just don't know what it is. Right? So could I get mad at the doctors for not preventing her death when they had no idea how to cure it? No. When you don't know how to stop something, you can't stop that thing. And yet, when we're talking about God, classically speaking, he's thought of as an omniscient God, God that knows all things. So he would know how to stop all evils. So number one, he's omniscient. But even if you know all things, you might not be able to prevent things. So for example, my wife miscarried when between my first and second, we've had three children, but between our first and second one, I remember sitting, outside of the San Clemente ER, which no longer exists, and with my with my son who was 5 years old. He was really little at the time, and trying to talk him through what's going on inside with mom. And at that point, it's not about not knowing how to stop this miscarriage. It's about just not being able to. There's nothing you can do, even if you knew everything. There's nothing you could do to stop that as a human. However, if you think about God and he creates all things there is, clearly it would not be very difficult for him to just reconstitute that miscarried baby. If he is omnipotent, if he is all powerful, then he should be able to stop all things and he would know how to, right? So this is where premise one comes from. He knows all things, he's omniscient, and he's all powerful, he's omnipotent. So if God exists, he could stop all evil. Premise two, if God exists, he would prevent evil. Have you ever seen that Seinfeld episode? It was like the second to last episode where there's the Good Samaritan law that if you see something happening and you don't prevent it, then you could be charged for it. I mean, if you couldn't prevent it, then of course nobody could be angry at you. But we just said that God could do all things. He could prevent all evils. Now, maybe if preventing an evil would cause an evil or jeopardize you in some way, right? Maybe if you don't want to step in to stop a mugging because you're afraid that you're going to get shot. But that's not the case with God. It seems like if you can prevent an evil without any harm to yourself, then you should. In other words, if you don't prevent an evil when you can, you're not being good in that case. But classically conceived, God is all good. He's the term omnibenevolent. I don't know that is used very often, but there's your term there, right? Here are your vocab words. All good, omnibenevolent. So if God exists, he would prevent all evils. Now, putting those two premises together, we get conclusion in number three. So if God exists, then evil doesn't exist. But premise four, evil exists. Now, we talked about the existence of evil in the previous episode, and we did talk about there is one possible response that evil doesn't exist. But even for people who say that evil doesn't exist, at least it seems like a universal experience that we at first believe that it does. We first believe that things shouldn't be a particular way, and yet they are that way. So, premise four, evil exists. And five, so God doesn't exist. Now, 3 and 5 follow logically. 3 follows from 1 and 2, although not quite the way they're written. You'd have to add some kind of premise, like if a being could and would stop something, then that thing is stopped. Something like that. It would be a very obvious and very innocuous premise that you're assuming there. So 3 follows from 1 and 2. 5 follows from 3 and 4. If you don't know what a modus tollens is, then check out my logic course. Actually, we're not there yet, but if you want to know about it, then go ahead and visit my Patreon page and become a patron and help me to make my videos free for the public on learning logic and philosophy. But 5 follows from the logical rule of modus tollens, right? It just follows. So if we are going to evaluate anything, it's really not going to be 3 and 5. It's really going to be 1, 2, and 4. Is it the case that God could prevent all evil and he would prevent all evil? Is it the case that evil really exists? Those are the kinds of questions we're going to be asking in the upcoming weeks. So again, subscribe. Let me know in the comments if you have any possible ideas. Like I always say, best philosophy happens in conversation. So, let me know what you think. What could possibly be a reason for God to allow at least some evils? And tag a friend if you think that they would find this conversation interesting. That's all I got for today. Adios.